The purpose of this short video is to describe several facets of what auditing is. What is auditing? Auditing, as it says here, it's an accumulation of evaluation of evidence about information to determine and report on the degree of correspondence. And this type of correspondence can be any type of correspondence, whether it be in writing, whether it be through video, as I'm doing right now, and just other different forms of communication. As it also indicates here, auditing should be done by a competent, independent person. The auditor must be qualified to understand the criteria used. It must be competent to know the types and amount of evidence to accumulate in order to reach the proper conclusion after examining certain types of evidence. The auditor must also have an independent mental attitude. The competence of those performing the audit is of little value if they are biased in the accumulation and evaluation of evidence. Also, when we talk about the independent person, auditors must strive to maintain a high level of independence to keep the confidence of users relying on their reports. Now think about this. If the type of financial report that you're trying to understand is mainly created by individuals who are in collusion together, meaning that they are best friends, are you normally going to rely on that type of report? And if you rely on that type of report, do you have good understanding if it's even valuable at that time? Because they may be doing something that is connected to their general overall positive purpose for their financial gain. Okay? And we also have several types of other auditors, such as internal auditors. Even internal auditors, those employed by the companies they audit, they usually report directly to the top management and the board of directors, keeping the auditors independent of the operating units they audit. So even if you have an internal audit team in your organization, know that possibly that they have to have the type of unbiased type of attitude throughout the total time that they're trying to formulate these financial statements. Now, there are certain types of standards to understanding exactly how to perceive certain statements, right? So one of the ways is by FASB and IASB. Well, FASB is part of the Financial Accounting Foundation, which is overseen by a board of trustees and is independent of all businesses and professional organizations. So that's where we get into line where we need independency throughout an audit, right? You want the organization to be independent so you can rely on its statements. The FASB is funded by fees paid by issuers, okay? And the IASB is overseen by trustees as well, but it is accountable to a monitoring board of capital market authorities. It is also funded by market participants, but is funded by relevant regulatory authorities as well. Now, when we talk about FASB currently has 7 board members appointed to the board of trustees, and each may serve up to 2 5-year terms. IASB has currently 15 members appointed to its trustees through an open and rigorous process that includes advertising vacancies and consulting relevant organizations. Now, the main difference between the both of these is that they just have different formal processes to better understanding if information is correct. As indicated before, evidence is very important, especially to these independent auditors. Okay? Now, it says here that evidence of any information used by the auditor to determine whether the information being audited is stated in accordance with established criteria, and some of the criteria is listed below. right? And mainly this type of criteria is a lot of electronic and documentary data about transactions. Think about all your financial transactions within your bank accounts. That's also evidence. We also have written and electronic communication with outsiders. So we have to save the emails. Think about your basic email accounts. When you forget a conversation or when you want to rely on a prior conversation that you had, you just go within your email. There's going to be observations by the auditor, and these observations are going to be clearly seen with your own eyes. So not just relying on communication with the outsiders through written form or through other data such as financial transactions on papers, but also just through your own evidence, your own personal primary evidence through seeing for yourself. We also have oral testimony of an auditee or a client. And my personal experience is that the oral testimonies often sometimes can be biased, because usually the people that you're attempting to retain a testimony from usually still work for the organization. And if they still work for the organization, sometimes they fear the repercussions of telling the truth. So to satisfy the purpose of an audit, auditors must obtain a sufficient quality and quantity of evidence. Auditors have to determine the types of amount of evidence necessary and evaluate the information that corresponds to the established criteria. What does this mean? Is that everyone is going to have a different view upon what is valuable evidence. As evidence through even with your local police authorities, they have different views of what evidence is. Now, we do have certain criteria that maybe the FASB or the IASB may follow, but also certain organizations have their own criteria based on their own organization or the type of genre of organization that they have, the category type. So, as indicated before, we need a competent, independent person in order to evaluate evidence. And one of the reasons why you're in this class is to build up your competency to have a better understanding of evidence and how to proceed through evidence. Now, as a certified fraud examiner that I am, I constantly have to take continuing professional education credits in order to have a better understanding of different types of evidence. Now, what you're doing right now is building up your competency as well by taking this auditing course, but also other courses that may be in line with what an accountant should probably know at an entry level. And once you better understand the independence, the unbiasedness that is needed in order to evaluate information, then you can possibly have a proper conclusion. Now, the final stage of the auditing process is the audit report. Now, we're doing all of this, all of these things that we're learning in order to build up our competency levels and to gather evidence is all to connect to the final report. So the final report in auditing, it communicates the auditor's findings to users, right? So these users may be internal users or there may be external users. When we talk about an audit report, which mainly has to follow a certain format, which is generally accepted accounting principles, right? It has to communicate to the external users. Right? So the reports may differ in nature, but the thing is that all must inform readers of the degree of correspondence between the information audited and the established criteria. And within that audit report, there's going to be certain established criteria that it's going to follow. And reports are also going to differ in form and can vary from the highly technical type usually associated with financial statement audits to a simple oral report in the case of operational audit of small departments' effectiveness. And we'll start to study anything about the department's effectiveness and the types of operational audits needed later. The audit of a tax return. The key parts in the description of auditing are illustrated in this example here in Figure 1.1, using an IRS agent's audit of an individual's tax return as an example. To determine the tax return was prepared in a manner consistent with the requirements of the Federal Internal Revenue Code, the agent in this example usually examines supporting records provided by the taxpayer and from other sources such as the taxpayer's employer. After completing the audit, the Internal Revenue agent issues a report to the taxpayer assessing additional taxes, advising that a refund is due, or stating that there is no change in the status of the tax return. Right? So even with the IRS agent, they're constantly evaluating evidence. They have this evidence for themselves, but they want you to create this tax return so they can have other facets of information that maybe they don't know about. Say for instance, they may not know exactly how much in charitable contributions you contributed to several organizations throughout the year. They also may not know about other forms of income in other countries. So we have this tax return in order to inform the IRS upon all the things that we've done throughout the year financially. They may ask for evidence. And in asking for even further evidence, you just have to demonstrate that you have that type of information through the type of evidence that we referenced prior, which could be electronic or documentary data, anything written or in an electronic form, or an observation by an independent party. So I hope that you have a better understanding of what auditing is.